Some stories begin with a gunshot, others with a wedding, but this one began with a door slamming shut in the Wyoming wind, a sound that would carry farther than anyone in Red Hollow realized. It was the kind of sound that meant change was coming, though none could tell whether it would arrive like a soft dawn or a brewing storm. If you've ever believed that strength can take many shapes, a man's calloused hands, a woman's unyielding spirit, or even the quiet resilience of children who've known too much loss, then you'll want to stay with me until the end of this tale. And if you find yourself nodding as you read, agreeing that some homes aren't built of lumber and nails, but of sacrifice and second chances, then go on. Like this story, share it, subscribe to it in your heart, because this one will demand your faith in people finding their way back from brokenness. It began on a bitter afternoon, the kind that cut to the bone, with Eleanor Hayes standing alone by the wreckage of a toppled stagecoach, her gloved hand clutching the frayed handle of a trunk that held all she had left of a life that seemed to shrink smaller with each passing mile west. She was not beautiful in the way of painted portraits, not striking like a woman dressed in silks from back east, but there was something about her carriage, the squared shoulders, the chin held high against the cutting prairie wind, that suggested she could weather storms far fiercer than the one gathering overhead. Her husband was gone, a fever 3 winters ago taking him before his time, and the child they'd prayed for had never drawn breath. Still she walked forward, carrying memory as her only inheritance. Red Hollow was supposed to be a pause, a place where the coach would change teams before she continued farther, perhaps to Oregon, where distant kin lived. But fate, fickle as ever, had other plans. The wheel had shattered on a rut in the frozen earth, the driver cursed, and passengers scattered, muttering about broken axles and the days it would take for repairs. And so Eleanor found herself stranded in a town too small to notice her, until one man did. Levi McKenna was his name, though most spoke it with the kind of reverence reserved for mountains or rivers. Not because he was wealthy, though his spread was wide and cattle plenty, but because he carried the air of a man who bore burdens without complaint. Broad-shouldered, hair dark as storm clouds, eyes a shade of gray that mirrored the prairie sky before thunder, he was not the kind to waste words. He stood on the edge of the depot platform, his 3 children at his side, each of them marked by the same piercing gray gaze but softened, in different ways, by grief. The eldest, a boy of 12, straight-backed and solemn as a man twice his age. The second, a girl no more than 9, clutching a doll with stuffing spilling from its seams, staring at Eleanor as if she were both stranger and savior. And the youngest, a boy of 6, cheeks red from the cold, eyes wide as if the world had already shown him its harshness but had not yet robbed him of hope. Levi's wife had died in childbirth 2 years past, leaving him with a ranch that needed more than one pair of hands and children who needed more than his silent strength. And when his gaze fell upon Eleanor, standing proud despite the ruin of her journey, it was as though some silent measure of fate clicked into place. He walked toward her, boots heavy on the wooden planks, his children trailing like wary shadows, and when he stopped before her, he removed his hat with a rough grace that spoke of respect more than charm. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, the kind of sound that seemed carved from stone and shaped by wind. "I can give you shelter, and I need your strength to build this home." No preamble, no pretty courting words, just the stark truth of a man who knew both the cost of loneliness and the price of asking for help. The wind tugged at Eleanor's cloak, rattled the broken coach wheel behind her, and she looked into the eyes of this cowboy who carried 3 small souls like anchors on his heart. She could have refused, could have walked away, could have waited for another coach to carry her toward the life she thought she wanted. But something in his gaze, not desperation, not pity, but a raw steadiness, rooted her to the spot. It was as if the land itself held its breath, waiting for her reply. She thought of her years of widowhood, of cold nights where silence pressed against her chest like a weight, of mornings where purpose seemed to dissolve like mist. She thought of her empty trunk, lighter than it should have been, carrying no future, only fragments of a past. And then she thought of the children, their eyes fixed on her as though testing whether she might crack or hold. Eleanor Hayes was not one to run from hardship. She had carried too much loss to pretend at fragility now. And so, though her voice trembled when it left her lips, the words came sure. Shelter, you say? Then tell me, Mr. McKenna, what kind of strength is it you believe I have? Levi studied her, head tilting just slightly, as if the answer were already written in the way she stood against the cold, or the way she met his gaze without flinching. The kind, he said slowly, that holds a roof together when the wind tears at the shingles. The kind that keeps children steady when the world says they should fall. The kind that don't break when days get mean. Behind him, his daughter's grip on her ragged doll tightened, as if she too wanted to believe this stranger could be part of such strength. Eleanor drew in a breath that tasted of dust and iron and something new, possibility. And though she did not yet know if this was folly or fate, she knew this. Her journey had not been broken by the stagecoach wheel, only redirected. Somewhere in the howling wind, in the shadow of Levi McKenna and the 3 pairs of gray eyes fixed on her, the story had already chosen her, and she, in turn, would choose it back. Homes are not born in the pounding of nails or the laying of stone. They are coaxed into being in the quiet, unguarded moments when strangers begin to trust each other. Eleanor Hayes learned this truth in the weeks after she accepted Levi McKenna's offer, when the sprawling ranch house became less a shelter from the prairie wind and more a place of testing. Testing her patience, her resolve, and her heart. The mornings began before dawn, the air sharp enough to sting her lungs, and she found herself standing at the stove, coaxing flames to life, while 3 pairs of watchful eyes tracked her every move. Levi's eldest, James, eyed her with the suspicion of a young man too old for his years. He held his father's silence like armor, shoulders stiff with the belief that needing anyone else meant weakness. His sister, Mary, balanced hope and wariness in equal measure, sometimes slipping into the kitchen to help knead bread with small, determined hands, other times retreating when grief pulled her back into herself. And the youngest, Samuel, he was still soft with childhood, quick to climb onto Eleanor's lap, quicker still to ask the questions the others dared not voice. It was Samuel who first called her Miss Ellie, a name that stuck like a candle flame in the cold house, softening its shadows. Yet it was not only the children who tested her mettle. The land itself pressed upon her with its endless demands. Fences sagged and splintered beneath the weight of winter storms. Cattle bellowed in the dark hours, and the wind sang its mournful tune through cracks in the walls as though determined to remind her that she did not yet belong. But Levi was there, not always with words, but with presence. When her hands blistered from hauling water, he set another pail beside her without comment. When she stitched torn shirts by lamplight, he sharpened tools across the table. The scrape of his whetstone a steady rhythm that somehow spoke more comfort than conversation. Their partnership unfolded in these silences, a rhythm of labor and endurance, until slowly, imperceptibly, respect began to grow roots where doubt once lived. Still, building walls of trust with the children proved harder than shoring up the ranch itself. James challenged her authority, testing boundaries with the cold defiance of a boy protecting his father from intrusion. Mary clutched her doll until it seemed frayed, whispering questions at night Eleanor could not always answer, about mothers, about loss, about whether God ever listened. And Samuel, though quick with laughter, sometimes woke crying, calling out for the woman he no longer remembered except as a shadow in his dreams. Each trial pulled at Eleanor's heart until she understood what Levi had meant that day at the depot. He didn't just need hands to work the land. He needed strength to mend souls that had been splintered by absence. And so she gave it, not in grand gestures, but in the 1,000 quiet offerings of presence. A hand smoothing hair damp with tears, a story told by the fire, a steady gaze that told James she saw not only his defiance but the fear behind it. Through it all, Levi watched, sometimes from the porch, arms folded as the children gathered around her, sometimes from across the supper table, where her voice filled the spaces his could not. And in those moments, the walls of the house seemed to shift, as though breathing again after long silence. It was no longer just his home, it was becoming theirs. Yet beneath the steady rhythm of days, an unease stirred. Whispers in town of a land barren tightening his grip on Red Hollow. Debts called in, boundaries disputed, menacing riders seen near lonely homesteads. Eleanor heard the rumors and saw the shadow they cast across Levi's face when he thought no one was watching. She knew then that the home they were building together would not be tested only by wind and winter, but by men who hungered for what others had. And no fear pressed against her heart, so too did resolve. For Eleanor Hayes had not chosen this place only for shelter. She had chosen it for the chance to belong. And belonging, once claimed, was something she would fight to keep. Storms do not always roar from the sky. Sometimes they ride in on horseback. The day came when the land baron's men appeared on the ridge, their silhouettes dark against the late sun, and the quiet Eleanor had helped nurture within those walls trembled like glass before breaking. Levi stood ready in the yard, his rifle within reach, but it was not steel alone that braced him. It was the sight of Eleanor at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her gaze steady as if to say, "You are not alone in this fight." The children clustered behind the doorway, wide-eyed yet no longer as fragile as before, for they had learned in these months that family was not something grief had taken from them, but something rebuilt in fire and bone. Words passed between Levi and the baron's men, hard, sharp, the language of threats cloaked as business, but when it became clear no fear could drive them from this land, the riders turned, vowing to return. That night, in the hush of the fire's glow, Eleanor mended a torn shirt while Levi polished the rifle, and the weight of what might come hung between them. Yet beneath it was something else, something neither had spoken but both had begun to understand. This was not a bargain of convenience anymore. It was a life, fragile but fierce, stitched together by choice. James lingered close to Eleanor's chair, no longer cold in his defiance. Mary leaned against her, head on Eleanor's shoulder, as if anchoring herself in a new certainty. And Samuel, half asleep, whispered "Mama" before drifting off, not in confusion, but in acceptance. Eleanor's hand stilled at those words, her breath catching, but Levi only looked at her with the quiet gratitude of a man who had asked for shelter and found so much more. When dawn broke, it carried no gunfire, no violence, only the stubborn prairie wind rattling the shutters. The baron's threats might come again, storms would surely rise, winters would always bite, but within those walls something stronger had taken root. For homes are not truly tested in their timbers, but in the hearts that keep them standing. And on that ranch in Red Hollow, against grief and greed, loneliness and fear, Levi McKenna and Eleanor Hayes had built not just a shelter, but a home, one worth defending, one worth belonging to, one worth loving.